Hello everyone, on this rainy afternoon, you have reached Steno 24/7. Today I am here to dictate for you selection number 38. 854 words on the subject of payment for services, and this is going to be at 80 words per minute. Let's make it 90. 90 words per minute. Ready? Let's write. Members of the jury, let me first commend you for the very careful attention that you have been paying to the testimony in this case and to the arguments of counsel. It is a rather unusual case. The plaintiff, Florence Doolin, is seeking a verdict at your hands against Agnes Rowland, administratrix of the estate of James Porter, deceased, the defendant. It is the contention of the plaintiff that she, a stranger, not related to James Porter, rendered valuable services to Mr. Porter beginning in 1945 and up to March 19, 1956, when Mr. Porter died. That there was no payment in cash made by Mr. Porter to Mrs. Doolin during that entire period, about 11 years, that she did receive her board and lodging, but that she was promised by Mr. Porter that he would compensate her for her services by providing in his will for her. That, in general, is the contention of the plaintiff. She says that no will was found making any provision for her after Mr. Porter's death, and therefore she says she is entitled to receive from the estate of Mr. Porter, from the defendant in this case, the reasonable value of the services which she rendered in reliance upon the promise of Mr. Porter to compensate her by providing for her in his will. To substantiate her claim, she produces the testimony of a large number of friends and acquaintances of Mr. Porter and of Mrs. Doolin. It isn't necessary to review in detail all of the evidence submitted by these various witnesses, but it is sufficient to summarize that testimony with regard to the services rendered by Mrs. Doolin in the following brief sentences. It is admitted in the pleadings that beginning June 15, 1945, and up to February 1st, 1946, the plaintiff, at the request of James Porter, acted as his housekeeper and cared for his sister, who was ill and incapacitated. It is also admitted in the pleadings that $35 per week was the fair, reasonable value of the services rendered during that rather short period. Mrs. Doolin, according to the testimony, continued to act as the housekeeper in the various homes to which Mr. Porter moved to from time to time. She did all the housework, cooked, cleaned the house, did a lot of extra work in the way of taking care of apartments which were rented to tenants in the house which they occupied as their residence, and also in the other house which they occupied as their residence, and also in the other house on 6th Street, which was owned by Mr. Porter, that was rented out. There is some testimony that she also helped in taking care of merchandise purchased by Mr. Porter in his business, that she helped to make that merchandise sellable. You have the testimony of Mrs. Lawrence, who said she was engaged in an employment agency. She gave it as her opinion that $45 was the reasonable value in addition to board and lodging for all of the services which the witnesses claim Mrs. Doolin rendered over the period beginning about 1952, when the 6th Street house was acquired. This is a suit in contract. Now, there are various kinds of contracts. A contract, of course, is an agreement between two parties which imposes a legal obligation. It can be an expressed contract where one agrees to render services and the other agrees to accept those services and to pay for them. There you have an expressed contract. And there can be a contract implied, in fact, where there is no expressed agreement, but where the intention is clear from the conduct of the party. One renders services and the intention to pay by the recipient of the services can be reasonably inferred from all of the circumstances. That is an implied contract, a contract implied, in fact. Then you have a contract which is implied in law, which is the kind of contract that the plaintiff claims exists in this case. She does not say, and none of the witnesses say, that Mr. Porter ever expressly or implied agreed in fact to pay Mrs. Doolin the reasonable compensation for her services. But she says he did expressly agree that he was going to provide for her in his will so that she would be compensated for her services. And because he failed to provide for her in his will, because there is no will found which makes provision for her to compensate her for her services, she says the law implies, out of equity and justice and reason, that she ought to be able to sue the estate of the decedent for the reasonable value of her services. Therefore, the law implied a contract implied in fact. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, can you give it a thumbs up? Thank you so much, and I'll see you at the next video. And happy writing, everyone.